Elon Musk predicted on Monday that the United States is entering an underpopulation crisis and that it would only get worse from there. If this trend will continue, the situation is looking very dangerous. Because this underpopulation collapse, as Elon explains, will cause a lack of human resources throughout many directions that will cause a giant economic crisis. As Elon explains, this is a very serious issue for everyone and we need to act quickly until it is too late, because with this rate current generations may be some of the last ones to exist and we need to avoid this catastrophe. A few days ago, Musk posted a few tweets consisted of a line graph sourced from the Wall Street Journal, one of which illustrated the US total fertility rate dating back to nearly 5 decades, with the total fertility rate accounting for the average number of children a woman has in her lifetime. He considers the last 2 years in the United States to be a demographic disaster. So statistically, for a generation to replace itself, that rate needs to be maintained at 2.1. The graph particularly shows a large concentration during the post-war baby boom era of the 50s at around 3.7. It fell sharply the following year, below 2, which is saying something. The graph later showed the rate shot up in about the early 2010s before plummeting again. Today, however, the rate appears to be about 1.6, according to the graph, which is alarming. And Musk may as well be right about this. Underpopulation may kill us before any pandemic does. Interestingly, Musk's tweet gained a lot of traction, getting thousands of likes and retweets, so now you know how the internet feels about this problem. You can argue that Musk's followers are of a particular demographic, but that still counts as major public opinion. Previously, Musk has said that the climate would be fine, even if the world's human population grows twice the size that it is. And mind you folks, Musk is someone who knows his facts and figures on this subject. He's a staunch advocate for clean energy, so you might as well believe that this is coming from a legit source. On the flip side, however, researchers and economists have deemed this decline as something as an anomaly. The 2008 decline, of course, was heavily correlated to the global financial depression of that year, which led to one of the worst recessions the US had ever faced. And logically, since economic pressure and working hours doubled, nobody had the time or money to start a family. However, the rate did not increase in the years that followed, even when the economy improved. In fact, as of 2020, the US birth rate was 55.8 births per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 44, a decline of almost 20% from the rate of 69.3 in 2007, according to an EconoFact article. However, this population decline is witnessed across various demographics all over. So let's take a look at that. In a recorded census, it's been observed that the fertility rate has fallen among females, both with and without college educations, married and single women, and among even white, African American, and Latina women, research suggested. So, what effect does that really have on the world? Or rather, the question we should really be asking is that, what are the damages of this particular phenomenon? That depends on who you're holding viable to answer. Human beings, of course, practically run the planet, so they're important. An infant wave of today will be running the schools, hospitals, banks, and nursing homes of tomorrow. They will be the one who will be paying the taxes that keep the country's economy afloat, and they'll invest in the real estate, stocks, bonds, and even cryptocurrency that the adults of today have put all of their life savings into. Realistically, underpopulation is linked to an aging population that becomes a burden on the economy. There is a weakened and reduced workforce, leading to a scarcity of skilled and modern labour. What comes as a result of that is that supply and demand economies that can't fulfill the supply for that massive industrial demand. This leads to the industry losing money by bearing higher labour costs and stagnating their business growth by not taking any risks. It's a lot to take in, we know. And Musk seems to have taken personal responsibility for doing his part in this crisis. In fact, Musk is now even publicly acknowledging and flexing the fact that he has 8 kids. Yes, you heard that right. But well, the tech mogul seems very content with his choice, saying that it's very rare for people of wealth to have more kids or big families. The United States now has a population of more than 330 million people. Globally, it's almost 7.8 billion individuals. Immigration is seen as a simple method to preserve the size of the American population by researchers. As a result of fewer people, there are less resources, and deflation is caused. It implies that the cost of items drops. Manpower is insufficient to create industries, so production falls as the result of this. Moreover, if we were to look at it from an evolutionary point of view, and specifically from a Musk-specific evolutionary point of view, then the problem of underpopulation also is one that threatens his plans of populating Mars with humans. He says that if there aren't enough people on Earth, how are we going to have enough people on Mars, an alien planet that we're supposed to colonize after Earth? Since the dawn of time, human beings are the ones who have roamed the planet, the ones who have built it for what we know it to be. And losing all of that, nearly 400,000 years of history, culture, and communal progress, is kind of depressing if we're a bit honest. The last thing we'd want is a generation of 80-year-olds slowly waiting for their death, and that is exactly what Elon Musk fears. Musk thinks that the biggest threat to civilization is underpopulation, and he seems to be very inclined to maintain that stance.
The world is facing a demographic crisis that has kind of come as a bit of a shock. Just a few decades ago, the great fear was overpopulation and the impact that it would have on the world's resources and natural systems. Today, many major economies around the world are dealing with exactly the opposite problem. Birth rates in most countries, especially advanced countries, have been falling steadily, and today we are well below the replacement rate, meaning that without immigration from a few regions that are still having children, our countries will start to shrink. This has a lot of economists in particular extremely worried about the impacts that this could have on systems that depend on a growing number of people producing a growing number of goods and services for a growing economy. The concern has become so severe that many governments around the world are now considering or actively experimenting with just paying people to have children as a way to reverse or at the very least slow down this problem. These policies will cost trillions of dollars and reshape the global economy, but they've been tried before, and they're responsible for some of the most severe economic problems in the world today. Even very light implementations of these systems to influence birth rates, like child tax credits, which are at the centre of economic policy debate right now, can have profound impacts on economies, and it's often not until decades later that these impacts are fully realised. The medicine may be worse than the illness, but it's also important to understand why a shrinking population is apparently such a big problem in the first place. To properly grapple with what may be one of the most dangerous economic tools in the arsenal, we need to, as always, answer a few important questions. Why are populations shrinking? Why is this such a problem? And finally, why is paying people to have children such a terrible solution to this problem? Ageing populations and low fertility. The latter being the easier one to influence without some drastic actions. Only a handful of countries get a ton of coverage regarding their ageing population. The reality is this is a widespread concern, with many trailing behind those under the spotlight by just a few percentage points. In 2022, World Population Prospects pointed out that people aged 65 plus are growing exponentially, far faster than younger demographics, growing from 10% of the global population to 16% in the next 25 years. Put another way, those 65 years of age or above will be about twice as common as children under the age of 5. Of course, an ageing population isn't necessarily a problem. More people getting to grow old is arguably one of the most valuable outcomes that an economy can produce. What's more is that it opens the doors for new labour to take the torch with the strength to complete difficult physical tasks and fresh ideas brought on with the advancements in education that are greatly assisted by having a large population of elderly people with decades of technical expertise and good old-fashioned life experience. But this transfer only works if there are enough people to carry the workload of their predecessors, and this is what makes the stalling growth rate so troubling. To keep things stable, every woman would need to have an average of slightly more than 2 children to account for early mortality, which is thankfully low in advanced economies these days and shrinking rapidly across the world, but it does still exist, so around 2.1 to 2.3 births per woman is normally marked as the replacement rate. Yet for major economies like the US, this golden number bobbed up and down through the 1970s, and by the end of the decade it dropped below 2 and has never recovered since.
The sad truth is, Italy is dying.
Italy's national birth rate has fallen to its lowest level on record.
Sicily, demographers warn that the shrinking population could drag the country into an unprecedented economic crisis.
And its economy is collapsing with it.
That is their debt to GDP level, currently sitting at around 150%, the second highest in the Eurozone.
Now, the European Commission has warned Italy it will launch disciplinary steps over the country's growing debt.
Yes, I said that. Third time in a decade, Italy's economy has slipped into recession.
So what's the problem? What's killing Italy? It has to do with 2 words: fertility rates. This refers to the number of babies each woman has on average. The fertility rate in Italy is one of the lowest in the world, with a number of 1.24 births per woman. To maintain a stable population, you need a fertility rate of about 2.1.
I know what you're thinking, and yes, total population is still growing from 8 billion today to a peak of probably 9 or 10 billion. But when we track total increase, we're looking at this star that seems to be shining brightly, but in actuality has already imploded. And that's because there's a difference between what's happening on the surface, which is obvious total growth, and the tectonic forces beneath. Since the 1960s, world population has more than doubled, but the growth rate has been falling the entire time. we're witnessing the most fundamental shift to take place in modern human history.
So if you look at this, you may say, well, it could be okay if they're having more newborns, 0 to 4, than people that are above 60. So if as long as that's bigger than the other, we should be okay. Look at this chart here on what it's looking like, comparing newborns to 4 years old, new kids being born, versus the population of 60 plus. This is deeply concerning. Take a look at this. 1950, if you look at that, till 1995, to secure, someone's got to take care of retirement. Every year they had a bigger population ages 0 to 4 than they did 60 plus until around 1995. Then look what happened to it. By now, the elderly people in China, 250 million people and climbing, while the 0 to 4 is declining. Who the hell is going to take care of these folks? Who? With what kind of money? With what kind of wealth? How are they going to handle this?
In January 2016, China finally announced the end of its controversial one-child policy, first rolled out in 1980. For the first time in almost 40 years, all couples were allowed to have up to 2 children. The key objective back then was to halt and possibly reverse the steep decline in the birth rates in the world's most populous nation.
I guess government was initially hoping that this two-child policy was going to be sufficient in raising the fertility rate, but the result wasn't there and they started to get more nervous.
The fertility rate kept falling drastically, down to 1.3 per woman, far below the replacement rate of 2.1 needed to maintain a stable population.
I believe there was a spike in the birth rate immediately following, but the effect quickly dissipated after a few years.
In May this year, China scrapped its two-child policy in favor of a three-child policy to try and arrest the rapid fall in birth rates. But getting parents to change their mindset will not be easy.
就是来的有点晚了，身边的朋友还是少数会考虑2胎3胎，大家都觉得这个压力已经很大了。
这个我是不会去改变我的想法的，无论说国家给予这个多胎开放，还有以及一些生育补贴或者一些东西的话。
Will the drastic policy shift lead to a rapid surge in the fertility rate? With fewer babies, coupled with the rapid increase in the number of elderly citizens, will that mark the end of China's phenomenal economic growth and hinder its rise as the next global superpower?